You mean the usage of violence?
Usage of violence.
Well, it's a very strange question because violence is not a question of importance to begin with. When I make my films, violence comes into the film if it's depicting a state of things.
Okay.
That thereupon, if I'm sponging a sort of reality and this reality involves violence, whether I like it or not, in the aesthetic transformation, you will find in an image something regarding violence. But this violence is not for the sake of promoting violence. This violence is actually to indicate or document, a state of a situation, let's say. So it's to put violence, with the word importance seems to be a little bit awkward. Rather, we'd say, if it's a love story, it's a love story. If it's a reality that involves violence, if it involves the daily reality, it is actually, I make my films from personal experience. So what you see in my films, in fact, usually is a reflection. Now having said that, this everyday reality that I live is not necessarily just the actual that you see. Sometimes it's also the fantasy that you fantasize.
Can you tell us something about your film called Disappearance?
Chronicle of a Disappearance? This is actually my first feature. This was done in 1996. It was quite, for me, the most important moment actually for making films, because it was my first attempt at composing a narrative. And it's a very precious film for me because it was first of all, it has a lot of raw elements. It's when one begins and when one experiments, and it's when one is so ambitious and so trying to throw oneself into all sorts of risky situations. This film involved a lot of risk in the making, a lot of unknown, which I think what makes cinema, fascinating at a certain moment. I'm not saying to say that my films after are not films I love, but I think what's interesting about this film is that the screws were not really screwed very well. So, in fact, it was up for a lot of dimensions in the cinema that normally one would want to actually be very sure, on the set. And there I threw myself into a situation where it was extremely risky. And in fact, now that I look at it, I still sometimes think that I will be making that film over and over. It's like the basis of the first film that I made.
Where does Palestinian cinema stand today?
Today?
Compared to the world?
Compared to the world? I think that I would say, it's very difficult to say cinema because we are very few who make cinema, maybe 10 people or 15 people. But I can say that in my repeated visits now to Palestine, I keep seeing new generations who are coming with new ideas. It's not always concerning just 35mm films. Sometimes it's video, sometimes it's experimental, sometimes it's simply the usage of a video camera to actually try out things. I think in that sense it's quite encouraging, but I think it's going to take some time before what you might call an accumulation is there. Palestinian cinema really started not long time ago, maybe in the 80s, with one filmmaker that started this whole episode of people wanting to make film, and his name is Michel Khalifa, and I think he after that, there was another generation of 3 or 4 people, myself among them, who, it was made more facile, it was made more easy for us to approach funders because there was suddenly a beginning, And now I'm quite shocked sometimes to see that even in Nazareth, where I come from, there is a college for cinema. And to see that when I just shot a film, for example now, a short film, when I shot Chronicle of a Disappearance, in order to collect a Palestinian crew, which is something at that moment I wanted to have, to start a sort of base for Palestinians to know how to enter the cinema field. I remember so much catastrophes in the shooting because of people not knowing exactly what that is, or let's say lack of efficiency, lack of professionalism. So it caused a lot of havoc at some point. compared to the film that I just shot now, which is incredible. I mean, you had young people in their 20s, they're all professional, they know what is a first AD, they know what is a second AD, they are, suddenly I discovered there are people who are doing from makeup to cinematography to, and this is in a small town of probably like 60,000 people. You have other centers, of course, and places. So that is quite interesting. I mean, now, for example, after doing this short film, I'm not at all scared, as I was actually, to go and make my long feature, which I'm going to make next year. I feel much more at ease, not to tell somebody what it means to do props or to do, not to explain, basically. And mostly how to be disciplined on the set, because you need a lot of discipline on the set. And when I made Chronicle, it was incredible. I had to personally explain while shooting, while acting, while directing, the whole thing. Sometimes explain to certain people that this is not the way to do certain things. And even the question of desire. In 1995, I remember the desire of people wanting to participate in a film was not there almost. The reason is they didn't know what it means. Slowly, that also quite progressed. And now I see, for example, that I really have to choose. It's not even a question of there's only one, I can cast. Same also for acting, because I use non-actors. The first film I made, it was, to convince people to join the film was really very hard. In due to another reason, actually, the fact that now they know my films, it's maybe also, a little easier when I say to somebody who's walking the street, come, would like you to act. It's not the same surprise, it's not the same shock, but they have seen many films coming from there. So I think it's quite encouraging, as opposite to the political situation, of course. But maybe there's a dialectic between this and that.